the California Landscape Stewardship Network. The network, for those of you who are or are not familiar with it, is a diverse range of partnerships who have come together across the state to facilitate peer exchange, share best practices and tools, build awareness, support and grow relationships, meet collective priorities, and promote innovation among land stewardship practitioners and colleagues. Catalyzed by the energy of 20 people in 2016 who met in San Francisco, we are a volunteer-led network of networks who include federal, state, and local agencies, nonprofits, academic institutions, and private land managers. While some of these partners have been working together for decades, other networks are emerging. Together, we represent the support of more than 200 partners and stakeholder groups, and we seek to amplify landscape stewardship work everywhere. And we include a bunch of opportunities to get to know relevant partners and relevant players in this field, and today is one of those. So for today's format, I'm just going to give you a little bit of background and then I'll hop right into our conversation. I'm going to be chatting with Dr. Norris for the first component of this interview, and then we'll open it up to all of you to ask questions and to enjoy your component of the conversation. If you have a question, I'm sure most of you are very familiar now with these Zoom webinars, but you can type it in the chat and we'll pull some relevant questions. And if your question does not get answered and you want to engage with Dr. Norris, then after this, you can contact her and we'll make sure that that contact information is available for everyone. And also this webinar is being recorded, so just note that if you miss something or if you want to send it to someone else, you will have that opportunity as well. And if you lose connection, you can hop back in, but it'll just be Jen and I in this conversation, and you'll have the opportunity to chat when we open it up for questions. So with that, I am extremely ecstatic about learning more about Jen and to have the opportunity to work with her moving forward, as I am sure all of you are as well. Just a little bit of background. If you didn't read her bio in the invitation, I'm going to provide some background for her and then we'll start the dialogue. Jennifer joined the resource agency on June 15th in 2020. So we were just chatting, and that's not even, or it's almost exactly a month. So happy 1 month anniversary.
Thank you.
As Deputy Secretary for Biodiversity and Habitat, she is responsible for overseeing our statewide biodiversity initiative, driving landscape scale restoration through partnerships and cutting green tape. Jennifer comes to us from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where she most recently was the field supervisor for the Sacramento Fish and Wildlife Office. Since 2013, she has overseen the implementation of the Endangered Species Act and other laws for over 100 listed and trust species across North and Central California. Over the course of her career, Jennifer has held several conservation positions within and outside of the service, including Deputy Field Supervisor for the Bay Delta Fish and Wildlife Office, the Rio Grande ESA Coordinator for the Albuquerque Fish and Wildlife Office, State Biologist for the New Mexico State Land Office, and as an environmental consultant in San Francisco. Dr. Norris has a BS in Resource Policy and Planning from Cornell University, an MS in Conservation Biology from the University of Michigan, and a PhD in Ecology from the University of New Mexico. And when she's not at work and not on Zoom, she can be found exploring beaches, forests, or deserts with her husband and her teenage son. So it seems to me that your background on paper definitely fits this position. And I'm excited to learn more about how your experience does as well. Just to kick it off, I have a question for you that's very general, and I think kind of will set the scene for the rest of today. I'm curious to learn about what inspired you to enter the conservation field and maybe how that has changed over your career since you first entered.
Well, thank you very much for having me. This is a great opportunity. I'm really excited to be here. I love that question because it gives me a chance to highlight a couple of things that are important to me. I actually grew up in suburban New York. I think I was supposed to be a lawyer or to work on Wall Street. That was my game plan. But when I was 11, I was sponsored by the local Rotary Club to go to an environmental education camp in upstate New York. It was run by the State Department of Conservation. And it was designed to get kids from the city mostly that hadn't been outside, sort of outside. And it was a week long. You got a little hunting and fishing, but lots of sitting outside. I memorized the Lorax. I can still recite that to this day. Don't ask me here.
Just about to.
And it changed my life. It changed my whole perspective. I got to appreciate forests. I got to climb mountains. I started to understand how ecological systems work and how all the parts fit together. And I was sold. And that was, you know, at age 11, my whole life trajectory changed. And most of my camp counselors went to Cornell. So I decided at 11, that's where I was going to go to college. And sort of one thing led to another, and I've never looked back. So I like to say I'm a true believer in the power of environmental education, because it can change someone's life, and it changed mine.
When you said that you thought you were supposed to be a lawyer, but I feel this field allows you to act as one. And
well, it's true. You get to play a lot with regulations and policies, and you have to understand them. And that's fascinating. But I think I was going to be like a corporate lawyer or something. I didn't even know the environmental field existed until I had that opportunity. So. But yeah, there's plenty of law in my life every day now. That's true.
Sure. And you also said that you would go to camp, and I'm wondering if that played in the landscapes you experienced there played into your interest, or what sort of landscapes did you enjoy visiting when you were a child that you would say were your favorite?
Well, that was in the Catskill Mountains. So, you know, an introduction to, you know, just beautiful, clear rivers and eastern hardwoods. And I loved all of that. But I came west actually when I graduated from college. And once I saw the big skies, honestly, I've never looked back. I've been kind of addicted ever since. And what I really love the most are the deserts. I mean, every time I'm out in the desert, it's so quiet and so empty. Those are definitely my favorite places on earth, but I love them all. You know, I can't pick one.
So you moved from New York and came west. When did that happen? It sounds like it was an experiential opportunity and you couldn't leave, but when did that happen, and how'd you continue migrating to California?
I came out to San Francisco when I just graduated college, so in 1990. And I worked in environmental consulting for a few years. I was a low-level analyst, and I decided I really didn't know enough to be in that field, and that I needed more school. So I went to Michigan, in part because being from the East Coast, I really didn't believe that you could be functional in a place where there was sunshine and surfing and beaches. You couldn't really go to college or grad school there. So I had to go somewhere sort of cold and miserable. So I went to Michigan, which was cold. Very cold and kind of miserable, but I had a great experience there. But at the end of my master's program, I thought I really still want to learn more. So I went and got a PhD at the University of New Mexico, which was a fantastic experience. And then I stayed in New Mexico, first working for the state and then ultimately for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And then after being with the service there for about 5 years, I actually met my husband in New Mexico. He was from California. And so I ended up back here. It's been kind of a long journey around the country.
Well, I'm sure you garnered a bunch of experiences that you can bring with you in this new role.
Definitely.
Where did you first move when you came to California?
Straight here to Sacramento. I got here in 2009, and I've been living in this house since, right here in East Sacramento.
Well, the temperature is desert-like there, so you might feel right at home.
Well, that's true. It's a little less dry, but.
And you're close to the mountains, though, in the ocean.
That's right, and the ocean, both, which I like.
Great location.
And I live near the river, which I appreciate every day. I get to walk along the American River, and I have to say it's beautiful. Just to see water flowing by is a great way to spend your morning.
What would you say is the most interesting restoration or conservation project that you have worked on over the years?
Worked on a lot, and it's hard to choose. But one of the formative ones for me was in New Mexico. I started it with the land office and then continued it when I was with the Fish and Wildlife Service. I worked on the lesser prairie chicken conservation strategy. There was a proposal to list the lesser prairie chicken, which is a lot like the sage grouse. And this bird lives in the oil patch and down in the rangelands of southeastern New Mexico and across a 5-state region to the east of that. And the Bureau of Land Management brought together a group of stakeholders to see if we couldn't develop a conservation strategy for that species. And it was really formative for me because the very first meeting that I attended was one of those meetings where everyone was screaming at each other. I mean, literally people were yelling, and it was hostile and it was angry. The ranchers were really angry at the environmentalists for proposing this listing. The agencies were caught in the middle. And BLM set up a process where we met 3 days every month down in Roswell, New Mexico. And we put together a stakeholder group of about 12 people. And over the course of 2 years, we worked together, sharing maps, sharing information, going out, kicking dirt, riding around in trucks, meeting in people's kitchens. And over time, you know, we really built some amazing relationships and ended up developing a strategy that was pretty solid and ended up being the launch pad for the 5-state conservation strategy that is still being implemented today. It's not perfect, but that experience, you know, just showed me that if you build relationships with people, you can come together and solve problems. It was really, it sort of set the stage for the rest of my career that collaboration is really the only way to get lasting success.
That must have been gratifying.
It was really great. I'll never forget, we'd worked on this strategy for 2 years. We'd tortured each other. I mean, it was painful. It wasn't easy. But when we finally had a draft, we had to sort of shop it around to a bunch of different communities in southeastern New Mexico, and we went to a town of Portales, which is way out on the eastern edge. And we were sitting up in the front of the room. It was a public meeting, and we were explaining this plan. And it was like being transported back 2 years because people in the room were standing up and they were yelling, you know, how dare you do this? And this is my livelihood, and screaming. And I'll never forget one of the ranchers that had been on the yelling side. He stood up at the table and he said, excuse me, you may not agree with what we're saying, but you will treat this man with respect. And he gestured to the environmentalist. He said, because this man is my friend. And I mean, I practically burst into tears in front of the room. It was really moving. And just like I said, it just showed me how important relationships are.
Yeah. Even if you disagree, you come together.
That's right.
And you'll defend your honor.
That's right.
Great. How was it working in Roswell?
Well, we were mostly in conference rooms, but I ate a lot of steak. I will say that. There was a lot of steak. But Roswell's a funny place. It's actually a cool little town, you know. It's sort of out there, but you can get an alien sticker if you need one, for sure.
The alien convention's there annually as well.
What'd you say?
I believe they have an alien convention there annually.
I think they do. I never got to go to that, but
maybe on your next reunion out there. I have couple more personal questions for you. One is about a favorite book. What book has influenced you in conservation ecology? And if you can't think of one, what general books do you like to read?
I have a reading problem in that I always have probably 4 books going at once. And so it's very hard for me to choose a favorite. I was thinking back on, you know, influences I've had, and, you know, early on it was all the sort of obvious Ed Abbey and Wallace Stegner. Wendell Berry was actually a pretty important influence on my life because he's very focused on sort of personal responsibility and your contribution to the problem, which really spoke to me. I could go on. Lately, I've been reading a lot of Rebecca Solnit, who really focuses on, you know, the long arc of movements and how everything we do can contribute to progress. And you may not be seeing that progress, but then at some point there's a tipping point and big things can really change. And she's written several different books of essays that really speak to that, having hope, even if it seems like we're not making progress, we are. And I think that's really true for the environmental movement. We have to maintain faith that we are going to get somewhere, but she also speaks to social issues too. So highly recommend her these days.
And a tipping point, that is such a relevant idea.
Yeah.
Right? On either side.
Yeah.
In the right way.
Yeah.
And what was your favorite wildlife species that you've worked on? Or if you don't have one, what do you wish you, in sometime in the future, had the opportunity to work with?
So I love all biodiversity, and I really can't pick a favorite. That's like picking a favorite child. I mean, I love systems more than I love individual species. I mean, I love them all. They're amazing. Their little faces. I love amphibians, and I love birds. I mostly studied birds for my research. The Bell's vireo was my main species, and so I spent a lot of time communing with an individual one. But I really love understanding how organisms sort of interact with their environment and with each other. So I tend to not be able to pick out one.
Well, then you're in the right field.
I think that's true. I'm very lucky, for sure.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and focus on your current and new role, which is also a new role in general. I bet the question that most people listening in are dying to ask you is about your interpretation of this new role and the objectives. And in your perspective, what are the main priorities? You can do short-term, long-term, whatever is most relevant at this point for you.
Well, I will say, I think this new job it's my dream job. I find myself texting Wade at the end of the day, Secretary Crowfoot, and saying, thank you for giving me my dream job. I feel like I've been working toward this sort of my whole life. It's a real culmination of a lot of things that I've been doing. But my main role is really facilitating California's biodiversity strategy. I think the elements are there. There's a lot of really good work being done, including this organization I'm talking to today, across academia, across government. There's really good work that's happening. And I think what we need is someone to sort of bring all those threads together and develop a statewide strategy that we can all understand, see ourselves in, and contribute to. Identify what the research priorities are, and then hopefully move those towards, getting conservation on the ground in a strategic way, whether that's wildlife corridors, whether that's setting aside wild places, or protecting working lands. All of those things need to happen. And like I said, I see my job as really a big facilitation role and a driver of that process. And then within that, there are sort of a couple of sort of strategic elements. One is restoration. We need to facilitate landscape scale restoration. We can't just preserve our way out of the biodiversity crisis. We've done a lot of damage, and we need to reverse some of that. And then as a key part of that is cutting the green tape, which has been part of my career for a long time, figuring out how to make regulations and policies work better for the things we want to do so we can get more conservation done. And so cutting the green tape is a big effort that the Secretary has put forward, and I'm really excited to be part of. And, that includes, it may include regulatory changes, it may include culture changes, it may include just thinking about our problems in a different way. And so, that's how I see my role at this point.
Well, you have over 100 participants listening in right now, so I think that everyone is very excited for this role. What resources do you need, and how can all of this audience help you in achieving those lofty goals?
Well, I mean, right now I'm in the I call it my sponge stage. I'm in the really trying to understand what are all the pieces that are out there right now. It seems like every week I meet 3 different groups that are doing really interesting and exciting things across the state. So right now, I just need a little patience while I get my feet under me and I sort of figure out how I want to move strategically forward. But the resources I think we're going to most need is energy and commitment of people to participate in the process. We're going to build a strategy together. It's not going to be just the state government strategy. It needs to be supported by stakeholders and people across the conservation community and outside the conservation community. And so, some of that is going to be helping identify what the key drivers of biodiversity are, where the research needs are, helping fill those needs. There's a lot to be done, and I will definitely be back to let you know specifically what I need. But it's only been a month, but I'm getting there for sure. I'm starting to build a picture in my mind of where I want this to go, for sure.
And I think all of us, I think I speak for all of us, and we'd be very happy to help you in the learning curve.
Great. Well, I hope that the questions today will include people telling me their ideas, because I'm very interested in hearing those, for sure.
Well, That's a great point. So hopefully if anyone has something relevant that's not necessarily a question, but a comment that might help Dr. Norris out as she's learning.
Definitely. I would love that.
And speaking of working with all of us, it sounds like to me from your experience and how you described your experience, you really understand the importance of collaboration and building collaboratives and the need to do that for landscape stewardship. What organizations do you think you need to approach, and how do you want to build your network if you have thought about that yet? And if not, something good to think about.
I haven't had to think about that because everyone's calling me, which is great. And like I said, I keep learning of new groups that I just haven't come across in my experience. California is amazingly rich in biodiversity, but it's also amazingly rich in people who want to do good conservation, which is very exciting. And so I guess I would encourage people to, reach out to me if I haven't met with you already. If you know of a network that I should get engaged with, I'm definitely interested in being part of that.
Great. And what's your approach to building relationships and trying to bring people?
Well, in the world of Zoom, it is not as easy as it was. And I will say, I hope we get off the screen someday. People have been incredibly gracious, but it's hard. I love to meet people and get to know them personally and spend time with people, go out in the field, sit together around a table. None of that's happening right now, which is definitely a challenge. But I think the key, and you can do this over Zoom, is really, for me anyway, it's the listening. It's really trying to understand what is the challenge you're facing, where are our common, goals, where are our differences. I try to really listen and understand so that you can find a solution that is actually solving the right problem. I think one of my favorite questions really is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And what's our purpose? Where are we headed? What are we trying to get done? And so I always try to keep those in mind when I'm talking to people, because people get frustrated and they tell you that frustration, but I always want to sort of dive in and understand what's the thing that's really not working so that we can solve that. That's the approach I like to take.
That sounds like a great approach. In terms of your most recent experience near switching to a state agency, what do you think are the opportunities that you could bring to the table, having worked for the federal government, and maybe bridging some gaps or lessons learned or other things you can bring from those experiences?
Well, one of the things I did in my last job, really, I'm super proud of my office. I feel like we, partly because of budget cuts, which I think we're facing now again with, we're facing that with the state now, we really had to get lean and creative about how we did our work. And I think that allowed for a lot of regulatory streamlining that might not have otherwise happened. People wanted to spend less time on things that didn't get us a lot of conservation, and more times on the things that did. And we innovated a lot. One of the things I'm really proud of is different permits we were able to put together, 2 habitat conservation plans. One we finished last year, one that's about to be finished, where we were able to put Endangered Species Act and Corps of Engineers 404 permitting into one place, so that the money we spent on conservation goes to meet both needs, rather than having sort of 2 different projects that maybe only each need a little bit. And that was really innovative and groundbreaking. And so I guess that perspective, that if you think hard about the problem and you get the right people in the room and they're willing to be creative, you can find regulatory approaches that maybe you haven't thought of before. Or if you're willing to take this and be creative, it's possible. So that experience, of sort of pushing on some of those more risky moves, I think has given me a little bit of confidence that we can find some of those streamlining opportunities with the state.
And it's nice you could say that definitively because you worked in that sector. So
I feel like I've been through the wars on the federal side, so now I'm ready to try it on the state for sure.
Well, I think that's great experience that you bring to this role. I have a bunch of questions coming in, so now I'm going to be fielding those questions so that those out there in the audience have an opportunity to chat with Jen. One question about cutting the green tape. You probably have just been drinking from the fire hose learning about this initiative, but in your initial conversations with Secretary Crowfoot, what can you describe as the progress that has been made in those roundtables that the Landscape Stewardship Network has been very involved in as well? And what's the progress from that lens, and what do you think the timeline is moving forward?
So to everyone's credit, they waited for me. I think they were ready to sort of finalize that document, but Wade was really hoping that I would have a chance to sort of dig in and really understand the recommendations that came out of that roundtable. And so I've been doing that, working with the folks from the Stewardship Network, and we are cranking. We actually have a date later this afternoon to keep working on that document. So our goal is to have a sort of solid draft by we can roll out to the secretary and start figuring out how to get that finalized. But of course, that document is sort of the beginning of the process in some ways, right? It identifies a series of recommendations, things we can try, and try is the wrong word, things we're going to implement, things we're going to do. But that's going to require a larger group of folks to get it done. And so that's really, we're hoping to launch that by fall, is getting that sort of strategic working group that can help move some of those recommendations forward. I think there has been progress already as well. I mean, there are some ongoing efforts and examples that we can draw from, both within the agencies and outside. And I think there's momentum around this issue. It's not an easy one, but like I said, I'm pretty confident that we can make good progress.
And we were in the throes of finishing up those roundtables when we had to go. So yeah, there's a lot of that type of momentum that we lost in having all of those great interpersonal interactions and those in-person meetings. But I think there's also some value or benefit that we can find in going virtual to help move that process along. Have you thought about innovative ways that you could bring in or continue that momentum, considering that we can't all get around a real table together?
Well, I know that the network reached out to the folks, in a lot of different folks individually, that they were going to meet with in Southern California. Their plan was to have a big group meeting, and it didn't happen. And they've reached out individually, but I'm hopeful that we can bring groups together, and if it has to be virtually, it does. But like I said, those recommendations are great ideas, but they're the beginning. But how to get them done is going to require a lot of other smart people at the table. And so I am expecting that we will be reaching out, like I said, to agency folks, but also to other stakeholders who really have experience with these things and can help us see, what's going to work.
Yeah, and we've collected a lot of information on those experiences through this process.
Yeah, for sure. None of that will be lost. We're keeping all of it, for sure.
And as you said, the recommendations are one thing. Actually putting them into practice is a whole nother ballgame.
Right.
Okay, slightly switching gears. We would love to hear what you think about the state and us as environmental practitioners, and how the state can move away from being reactive and special status species driven to a more landscape scale. I know that from your introduction, that's one of your big priorities, is to look at things for conservation at landscape level. How can you help make that shift?
Absolutely. Well, I think the biodiversity strategy really is designed to be that way. It's designed to go beyond species at risk and really investing in biodiversity upfront before we have a crisis, and trying to, at least if I'm in charge of it, it will be taking that landscape view, because I believe that if we don't have functional ecosystems, it's not enough just to have a protected species. It doesn't work. So what I'm sort of picturing in my mind is this strategy really does identify the key ecosystems and landscapes that we need to protect to preserve biodiversity. I'm a very map-driven person. I think this is going to be a map-driven product if I have my way, because that's how my mind works. And that we're thinking across, where are the key strategic places that we really have to zero our effort, focus our effort and get things done. So I'm hopeful that if we take that approach, we won't always be in this reactive mode, but we'll be sort of protecting biodiversity in advance of any crises. And also thinking ahead about climate change, thinking strategically about where we're going to need habitat in the future. So those will all be, I think, key to this process.
And then going back to the relationship between the state and the federal, how do you see state and federal land managers working together to reach that biodiversity goal and landscape level conservation?
You know, I have a lot of good relationships, obviously, with folks in different federal agencies. And I think I understand where their authorities are and what their opportunities are for participating in biodiversity conservation. So I think it's just a matter, again, of having that conversation and being strategic about where, you know, what your goals are and how you want to achieve those, and then working together in a collaborative way to get those done. You know, I'm not sure I have a specific how-to other than, again, like making sure you're working with the folks who really have the opportunity to leverage their resources.
Great. Do you have any plans to establish a cross-agency working group, maybe to help with the Cutting the Green Tape initiative or of a California Biodiversity initiative? Any sort of thoughts around that?
Yeah, I mean, there are groups that exist. And so what I'm trying to do is figure out how to best leverage those and use them in an effective way to meet these larger goals. So things are sort of on pause while I'm sorting all of that out, but I think absolutely we're going to need, you know, cross-agency and then the broader stakeholder community, whether they're all part of one team or whether there's sort of multiple teams. I haven't really thought that through. But absolutely, I think, you know, it doesn't work if we just try to do it as the state. You know, we're part of a network of public, private, you know, and federal and state land managers that all need to work together for sure. And that's where you can help, right?
Definitely. That is definitely where we can help. We could fill those working groups up with a ton of people.
Excellent. That's what I'm hopeful for.
Okay, there's a question that just came through that really resonates with me because it's about volunteer-based stewardship. In my organization up in Tahoe, we do a lot of community-based restoration and education. And this question asks if you had any anticipation of funding for those types of opportunities or programs, and how we can build stewardship and volunteerism to help us reach our conservation goals.
I will say that that's not a field I have a lot of experience with, but I'm definitely interested in having that conversation. I would love to hear more about people's ideas of how we might do that. I think funding is a challenge right now, obviously for all of us, but there are opportunities to leverage different kinds of funds. And if you have ideas, I'm open to hear them for sure.
Yeah, and that is, I think, one of the most important sectors, bringing in the volunteers to helping reach these types of goals. Not only can they help fill important gaps when there is funding deficits, but then you're getting more and more people engaged and understanding the importance, and then that kind of acts as a whole nother network of information flow. Yep. So that's an exciting opportunity for us to all collaborate. Do you feel that there could be state funding for monitoring biodiversity to understand where we are and the impacts of our actions versus just investing in the actual restoration actions themselves? So I guess the question is really focusing on where can we get more funding for monitoring? I think that's the endless question for us.
Yeah, I'm going to try to stay away from money questions right now, just because I don't have a clear enough sense. You know, we've just sort of come off the, you know, the end of one budget cycle and starting a new, and this is a new budget universe for me that I'm just getting to know. So I don't know the answer to the question, but I do know that it's important, and it's not enough to set land aside. You have to monitor it, you have to manage it. And so all those things are necessary. And I know there is a lot of need, just inventorying, you know, getting the data up front and then monitoring on the back end to see how we're doing. Both are really important, and I think chronically underfunded, unfortunately, in government.
Yeah, definitely an obstacle that came up numerous times in our Cutting the Green Tape roundtable conversations from all angles. It being an obstacle because it's so expensive and it's a requirement, or monitoring doesn't happen enough. So I feel like that question will be there for a while.
Good to know.
Okay, shifting gears again a little bit, how do you, or have you thought about incorporating environmental justice initiatives and partnerships into program and field and opportunity?
Well, the Undersecretary, Angela Barranco, this is really her initiative, is Access for All. And she and I have been having some initial conversations about how we can work together. I think it's going to be an ongoing conversation that is, it's really one of the pillars of the Secretary's agenda. And so it's not a field where I claim a lot of experience, but I have a lot of passion around it. And I'm very motivated to put our heads together and figure out how to make that happen. So that's definitely part of the goal, without question.
That's great to hear. And the timing now to dive into that more is couldn't be better timing.
I wholly agree.
We have little less than 10 minutes, so I might end with one question, then I'd love to give you the opportunity to kind of relay any message that hasn't been teased out through these conversations. Maybe a couple questions, because this one might be quick. Do you have any insight on when the California Biodiversity Council might reconvene?
I don't. I just sort of got read in on what their purpose has been and how they've been working. So they're on my radar. And like I said, I want to make sure that when we convene them, we're putting their time to good use. And so I think hopefully around the time that we start rolling out a strategy or, start developing a strategy in earnest. I will say from my, priorities, finishing the Cutting the Green Tape white paper is my #1 priority right now. And biodiversity is percolating in the background. And so after Cutting the Green Tape, that's when I hope to really relaunch that initiative. So I would expect fall is when we'll start to really be reconvening groups.
That's great to hear. Now that you've kind of gone through teasing out some components of your role, in 3 years from now, if you're to look back and this was the perfect first 3 years of your position, what does the successes look like? And you can identify some of the obstacles you've been able to overcome as well. But what would you feel that you would be proud of succeeding in and accomplishing in that time frame?
Well, success would definitely look like, not a fully fleshed out, but definitely a clear biodiversity strategy for the state that we can all point to and say, that is the thing we are building together. And here are the building blocks. I was recently reading a UN, there's a biological diversity initiative through the UN, and they have a lot of these plans that they're building sort of at the country level or even at the subnational level. And they describe their biodiversity strategies as an envelope. And I sort of loved that word. It's a holding space for all of these different pieces that are coming together. So I'm hoping that we've built that envelope and that we've started to put the different pieces together and been able to identify where our needs are and where our gaps are, and that we're all pulling in the same direction and we have a general understanding of what we want to get done. I also really hope we've made some good progress on Cutting the Green Tape and that we've identified some key things that can be done and we've done them. I think that's totally possible. I think that's totally a given that we can be moving forward on a couple of these initiatives and have them checked off.
That sounds like a great resume of success. So looking forward.
Hope.
Okay, there was one last question that popped up that I did want to get to because we didn't really touch on this at all. And then I'd love to give you the opportunity to relay anything we might not have covered.
Okay.
The question was around the private sector. We talked a lot about state and maybe nonprofits and this organization network. How do you, at this point, how do you see bringing them in and making sure that they're a part of your full conservation strategy?
Well, this is really where I have the most experience, actually. I was working in the regulatory environment where we were working on a lot of conservation as mitigation or mitigation as conservation, right? So we were working with lots of different conservation banking organizations, also folks that just, identified different parcels for mitigation. And so I have a lot of experience with that. I think there are a lot of really good groups out there that are doing important work, and that those conserved lands are part of our landscape that needs to be built into the fabric. So I think we need to be looking both at, places that we can preserve just on their own, but also building in mitigation. That's where there's funding actually to do good work. And if we're more strategic with those dollars, if we're more strategic with that mitigation, I think we can sort of build those landscapes out. And so I absolutely think there's a role to be played. Some of the folks that do you know, private sector conservation they're really perfected it, and they're really good at it. And I think we should make sure that our tent is as big as possible.
And then I'm assuming that also includes the for-profit sector, and maybe look at things that we may not initially think of.
I think that's right. I think there's room, you know, there's a lot of for-profit organizations that are doing great conservation. We should be considering, regardless of where it comes from, conservation has value. So, yep.
I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know you better, and I'm sure everyone listening in has a million more questions for you, and it's working with you. Is there any last minute, last parting words you want to relay, or even questions to pose to us that we can think about and come back to you with some of our thoughts?
Well, I have loved this conversation. I wish I knew who all the different people were on the phone so that I could put them into my network and get to know them all, but I hope they will reach out to me. I'm definitely looking forward to our work together. I think this is a great organization, and I'm excited for our partnership. I don't have anything that you haven't covered, except that, you know, this is a great opportunity for us to do good things together. So let's keep up the momentum, for sure.
We're definitely a resource for you, and share, put in the chat box your email, so you might be complex of emails.
Be patient with me. I get a lot of email, but I will respond eventually.
Got a lot going on right now, I'm sure. But there were some questions we didn't get to, so if you want to interact with Jen, please send those to her through the email that is in the chat box. And also, I would recommend, before you leave this Zoom, you get a chance to look at the Q&A in the chat. There's a lot of great messages I'm seeing popping up of
great
congratulations and people excited to work with you.
Awesome.
And this, like I said, this network is a great resource, and there's participants from all walks of life. We have agency folks, we have nonprofits, and people that are in all different time periods of their career. So definitely utilize us, and thank you for your time. And before we leave, I just want to say hi to all my network friends. You're all here, and it looks like you've sent this opportunity out to a lot of other of your partners and colleagues. So this has been an excellent first roundtable or conversation lunch interview. It's funny to be just being able to see Jen, that knowing that all of you are out there. And the last word that I would end on is, sadly, we were supposed to have our convening in June in Tahoe. Jen, I think you had the opportunity to kind of peruse some of our past convenings, but we meet all over the state in different landscapes. It's one thing that I think is really helpful and really meaningful for this partnership and this network. And we were supposed to meet up here in Tahoe. So sadly, I wasn't able to meet with all of you, but we've been working on these types of opportunities in ways that we could keep connected and bring in new friends and continue to forge new friendships. So make sure that you're checking in with the network for those opportunities. Days like this is meet and greet. If you have other individuals that you would like us to highlight through a meet and greet, let us know. And our summer series is continuing. The next event is June 27th. Sharon just put that up in the chat, so check that out. And thanks again so much for your time, Jen.
Thank you.
Hope it's helpful for you in the future, but it sure was for us.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a great rest of your Tuesday.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for joining.